Hey, folks, welcome back to HOA Karen Files, where we expose the wildest homeowner nightmares. Today's story is personal, raw, and packed with the kind of fight you don't see coming. Picture this, a retired Marine, living quietly in Austin, Texas, just trying to fix his truck and honor his service with a flag. Then, fake HOA cops crash his gate, trash his life, and think they can bully an entire neighborhood into submission. They didn't count on a brotherhood of battle-hardened bikers ready to roll in and flip the script. My name's Frank "Razor" Malone, and this is how I went from changing spark plugs to sparking a revolution in Cedar Ridge. From a widow's ruined garden to a $100,000 scam, you'll see how low these HOA goons sank and how high we rose to crush them. This isn't just my story. It's for every neighbor who's ever felt trapped by a power-tripping HOA. Stick around, because when the dust settled, we didn't just win, we changed everything. Let's dive in. I'm Frank Malone, but my brothers call me Razor. At 55, I'm a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, with 22 years of sweat and scars from Desert Storm to Afghanistan. In 2022, I parked my boots in Cedar Ridge, a sleepy Austin, Texas subdivision, chasing quiet. My one-story ranch had a garage for my Ford F-150, a porch for my Bourbon, and a flagpole for my Marine Corps flag, faded, stitched from Fallujah, where I'd buried too many friends. The $420 monthly HOA fees promised smooth roads, a community pool, maybe some peace. For 2 years, it was fine. Neighbors nodded, kids rode bikes, and I kept my head down, wrenching on my truck or grilling ribs on Sundays. Then Carl Novak slithered in, and everything went to hell. Carl was 48, a former car salesman with slick back hair, a fake tan, and eyes that sized you up like a used sedan. He took over as HOA president in December 2024, elected on promises of elevating property values. By January 2024, a 40-page rulebook hit our mailboxes. No flags over 4 feet. No vehicle repairs in driveways. No unapproved lawn ornaments. Gnomes, bird baths, even holiday lights needed Carl's blessing. He hired 4 security guys, not cops but meatheads in black vests stamped Cedar Ridge HOA, cruising in gray SUVs with magnetic logos. They'd snap photos of anything. A kid's tricycle, a crooked mailbox, my truck's open hood. Most folks grumbled but paid the $100, $200 fines to avoid drama. Me? I'd faced Taliban ambushes. Carl's clipboard didn't scare me. Trouble knocked first with a $150 fine for my flag, claiming it clashed with neighborhood aesthetics. I tossed the letter in a drawer. That flag flew over my platoon when we lost 3 men in a single night. It wasn't decor, it was blood. Then came $250 for unauthorized vehicle maintenance, because I changed my truck's oil on a Saturday. By mid-February, fines stacked to $800. Each notice threatening liens or lawsuits if I didn't comply. I marched to the January HOA meeting, all 6 feet 2 inches of me in my old field jacket, and faced Carl at the podium. The room was packed, 50 neighbors shifting in folding chairs, their faces tight with worry. Carl stood in a pressed suit, grinning like he'd already won. "This flag's been through war," I said, voice steady but sharp. "It stays up, and my truck's my business. Back off." Whispers rippled, some nods, some nervous glances. Carl leaned into the mic, his smile never slipping. "Rules are rules, Mr. Malone. Even Marines follow orders." The way he said Marines twisted my gut, like my service was a bumper sticker he could peel off. A few neighbors clapped, but most stayed quiet, eyes on their shoes. Carl adjourned the meeting, his goons eyeing me from the back. Outside, Mrs. Evelyn Parker caught my arm. She was 79, barely 5 feet, her gray hair pinned tight. Her husband, a Korean War vet, died in '53, and she'd tended his tulip garden ever since. "Frank, they're fining me $2,000 for my tulips," she said, voice cracking. "They say it's non-compliant. That garden's all I've got left of Jim." Her hands shook, clutching a crumpled violation notice. I walked her home, her steps slow, her story spilling out. Carl's goons had photographed her garden at dawn, left fines under her doormat, even peered through her kitchen window. "I'm scared, Frank," she admitted. "What if they take my house?" That night, I sat on my porch, bourbon untouched, staring at my flag under the floodlight. Evelyn's fear wasn't just hers. Then Gwen's down the street got $1,800 for their kid's skateboard ramp. Lisa Torres, a single mom and ER nurse, faced $1,400 for her porch light. She needed it for safety after 12-hour shifts. Old man Rodriguez, 82, was hit with $2,500 for his '67 Chevy, his pride since Vietnam. Cedar Ridge wasn't a community anymore. It was Carl's hunting ground. I'd seen bullies before, warlords, CEOs drunk on power, but this was my home. I wasn't running. I pulled out my phone and dialed Eddie Sarge Vasquez, president of the Lone Star Riders, my motorcycle club. We'd ridden together 10 years, all veterans, Marines, Navy, Army, some from wars older than me. Sarge, I said, HOA cops are shaking down my neighborhood. They're hitting widows, nurses, kids. I need the brothers. Sarge didn't hesitate. We're rolling in, Razor. Nobody messes with our own. I hung up, the night air heavy. Carl thought he could play general. He was about to meet a real one. The next morning, February 10th, 2024, I woke to a new violation notice taped to my garage. $500 for excessive lighting, meaning my porch floodlight. I snorted. Carl was scraping now. But the game was escalating. My security cameras, installed after a $300 noise fine for my lawnmower, caught one of Carl's goons at 2 a.m., slipping a GPS tracker under my truck's wheel well. I yanked it out, a cheap black box blinking red, and bagged it for evidence. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was a vendetta. I started documenting like I was back in recon. Every fine, every SUV drive-by, every smarmy letter from Carl went into a folder. My cameras recorded goons circling my street at odd hours, 11 p.m., 4 a.m., always the same gray SUV, license plate CR, HOA 19. I taped conversations with neighbors, their voices low, scared. Lisa Torres showed me her fines, now $2,200, her hands shaking as she described Tony, Carl's head security guy, banging on her door at 10 p.m. He said my light was a fire hazard, she told me. My son hid under his bed. Then Gwen's ramp was gone, torn down by Carl's crew while their kid was at school. Rodriguez found his Chevy's tires slashed, a $3,800 fine pinned to the windshield for abandoned property. By February 15th, I'd mapped Carl's pattern. Target the weak, pile on fines, threaten liens. Evelyn Parker was the worst hit. She called me over, her kitchen smelling of chamomile tea, her eyes red. They came inside. Frank, she whispered, showing a $3,500 fine for unauthorized indoor plants, her potted ferns, gifts from her grandkids. Tony and another goon, Rick, had walked right in while she was at the pharmacy, claiming an emergency inspection. They'd photographed her living room, left muddy boot prints on her rug. I don't feel safe, she said, clutching a photo of her husband in his army greens. I promised her, they won't touch you again. That night, I met Sarge at a diner off I-35, his Harley parked out front, gleaming under sodium lights. He was 60, wiry, a former Navy JAG officer with eyes that missed nothing. 3 Lone Star Riders joined U.S. Jimmy Doc Lee, 48, a Navy medic. Maria Viper Cruz, 42, an Army MP. And Nate Bear Thompson, 74, a Vietnam Green Beret who'd taught me to ride. I laid out the evidence. 12 fines totaling $9,000. The tracker, camera footage of goons trespassing. Viper leaned forward, her braids swinging. This is extortion, Razor. They're not security. They're a racket. Doc nodded, scrolling my photos. We need more victims. This is bigger than your flag. Bear sipped his coffee, voice gravelly. Reminds me of 68, village bosses fleecing farmers. You don't negotiate with leeches, you cut him off. Sarge spread a map of Cedar Ridge on the table, marking houses hit by fines. We start here, he said, circling Evelyn's place. Talk to everyone, quietly. Get statements, proof. I'll dig into HOA records, see where the money's going. Viper grinned. I'll check these cops. Bet they've got dirt. I felt the old fire, the one that kept me sharp in Kandahar. Carl wanted a war. He'd get one. Over the next week, I knocked on doors, my Marine jacket swapped for a plain hoodie to avoid attention. Neighbors hesitated, but stories poured out. The Nguyen's were $4,000 deep, their son skipping skate practice, ashamed of his missing ramp. Lisa's fines hit $3,800. She'd taken extra shifts, barely seeing her kid. Rodriguez, limping from arthritis, showed me a $5,200 notice for his Chevy, now towed to an impound lot Carl owned. "I can't afford to get her back," he said, eyes wet. I recorded it all, their voices raw, their anger rising. My cameras caught more. Tony slipping into Lisa's yard at midnight, photographing her trash cans. Rick tailing Rodriguez to his VA appointment, noting his license plate. Carl himself stopped by my house, leaning on my mailbox. "Life's easier if you play ball, Malone," he said, smirking. "Pay the fines, lose the flag. Be a team player." I crossed my arms. "Harassment's not in the bylaws, Carl." He laughed, walking off. "This is my neighborhood now." That night, I found another tracker, this time on my porch chair. I crushed it under my boot. Carl wasn't just watching. He was hunting. February 22nd, 2024, started calm, the kind of Texas morning where dew clings to grass and coffee tastes better. I was in my garage, elbow deep in my truck's engine, swapping a fuel pump. The radio played Merle Haggard low, my Marine flag hanging proud on the wall. Then I heard metal scream. I bolted outside, wrench in hand, to find Carl's gray SUV rammed through my chain-link gate, its posts bent like straws. Carl strutted across my lawn, his suit crisp, flanked by Tony, a 40-year-old ex-bouncer with a taser clipped to his belt. Rick and Gabe, two more goons, trailed with clipboards, their vests gleaming Cedar Ridge HOA. "Emergency inspection," Malone, Carl said, waving a paper that looked like a takeout menu. "You're in violation. Flag, truck, gate damage. Your fault for noncompliance." Tony stepped forward, yanking my flagpole down, the Marine emblem hitting dirt. "Eyesore," he grunted, kicking it into a puddle. Rick pointed at my truck, hood up, tools scattered. "Unauthorized repair, $1,500. Gabe scribbled, smirking. "Plus $2,000 for the gate, $700 for lawn clutter. Pay in 72 hours, or we lien your house." I gripped the wrench, my pulse hammering like mortars. Every instinct screamed to act. 22 years in war zones don't fade easy. But I saw Evelyn's house across the street, her curtains twitching. If I swung, Carl would spin it, paint me the villain. "You broke my gate," I said, voice low, each word a blade. "Get off my property." Carl laughed, adjusting his tie. "Rules are rules, Marine. Heroes don't get special passes." Tony tossed my flag into a bush, Gabe snapping photos. They piled into their SUV, peeling out, leaving my gate in ruins. I stood there, mud on my boots, flag in my hands. The stars and bars were soaked, torn at the edge. I'd carried that flag through sandstorms, pinned it over coffins. Now it lay defiled by a con man in a $200 suit. I didn't feel anger, just clarity. Carl had crossed a line, and I was done playing defense. I called Sarge, my voice steady. "They smashed my gate, Sarge. Ripped my flag. I need the riders, now." He didn't ask questions. "On our way, Razor. Hold tight." By noon, 6 Lone Star riders roared into my driveway, Harley shaking the street. Sarge dismounted, his JAG lawyer brain already working. Viper checked the gate, swearing at the $2,000 damage. Doc pulled my camera's SD cards. Bear and 2 others, Hank Wrench Diaz, a Desert Storm mechanic, and Lena Scout Brooks, an Air Force intel officer, scanned the street for Carl's SUVs. Sarge watched the footage, jaw tight. Breaking and entering, vandalism, fraud. This is a felony parade. Viper held up the torn flag, her eyes blazing. "This is personal, Razor. They're begging for a reckoning." "There, is Whitebeard catching sunlight?" Growled. "Disrespect the Marine's flag? They're lucky you didn't bury him." I nodded, cleaning the flag in my sink, hands steady. "It's not just me. They're hitting everyone, Evelyn, Lisa, Rodriguez. We end this." We set up in my garage, laptops and coffee replacing my tools. Doc synced the footage, Tony's kick, Carl's smirk, the SUV's license plate clear as day. Viper ran Tony's name through old MP contacts, digging for dirt. "He's got a rap sheet. Assault, theft, bounced from 3 security gigs," she said. Sarge spread HOA bylaws on my workbench, real ones from county records, not Carl's fake rulebook. "No clause allows forced entry or gate crashing," he said. "They're operating outside the law." Hank, quiet till now, spoke up. "This ain't just fines. Carl's got a bigger play, money, power, something." Scout nodded, her laptop open to Carl's social media. "He's running for city council, touting HOA leadership. Bet he's skimming to fund it." I leaned back, pieces clicking. Carl wasn't a petty tyrant. He was a crook with a plan, and Cedar Ridge was his ATM. We split tasks. Viper and Hank would tail Carl's goons, discreetly. Doc and Scout would canvass neighbors, collect statements. Sarge would pull financials from county clerks. Bear and I would secure my place, new locks, more cameras, no more trackers. We're not just fighting for your gate, Sarge said, his hand on my shoulder. This is for every neighbor they've screwed. I looked at my flag, now drying, and felt the old Marine fire. Carl wanted a war. He'd get the whole damn Corps. The next week was a blur of coffee, Harleys, and hushed talks. Sarge hit the county clerk's office, pulling HOA records going back 5 years. By February 28th, he had a bombshell. Since Carl took over, Cedar Ridge collected $112,000 in fines, but only $9,000 went to roads, pools, or lights. The rest? Consulting fees to 3 companies, Blue Ridge Solutions, Novak Enterprises, Cedar Security, all registered to Carl's sister, Diane Novak, a part-time realtor with no consulting experience. Shells, Sarge said, slamming the files down. He's laundering through his own family. Viper's digging on Tony paid off. He's no cop, she reported, tossing a printout. Arrested twice for impersonating an officer, fired from mall security for roughing up a kid. That taser? Unlicensed. Rick and Gabe were no better. Petty theft, bar fights, 1 DUI. Carl's security was a crew of small-time crooks, their vests bought online for $30. Scout hacked into Carl's campaign site, finding his pitch, proven HOA leader, ready to serve Austin. His donor list included Diane's companies, funneling fine money straight to his election fund. Neighbors came forward, their fear turning to fury. Evelyn Parker invited me over, her kitchen warm with fresh bread, but her eyes were steel. They bulldozed my tulips last week, she said, showing photos of bare dirt where Jim's garden stood. $4, $200 fine, or they'd lean my house. I'm on Social Security, Frank. I recorded her, promising justice. Lisa Torres met us at a park, her son at soccer practice. They entered my garage while I was at work, she said, voice shaking. $5,000 in fines. Light, trash, even my kid's bike. Tony said he'd escalate if I fought. Rodriguez, leaning on his cane, showed me impound papers for his Chevy, now $6,800 to retrieve, more than his pension could cover. Doc and Scout hit 20 houses, building a dossier. 18 victims, $42,000 in fines, half for nonsense like unapproved curtains or excessive mulch. 5 homes faced liens, 3 owned by widows over 70. Viper caught Rick planting a tracker on Lisa's car, her camera snapping his face. Hank tailed Carl to a downtown bar, overhearing him boast about cleaning up Cedar Ridge for his campaign. Every piece fit. Carl targeted the vulnerable, piled on fines, and banked the cash for his council run. When folks couldn't pay, he pushed liens, eyeing their homes for Diane's shells to snatch at auction. Sarge filed police reports, trespassing, vandalism, fraud, but Carl's cousin, a city clerk, could stall them. We need more than cops, Sarge said. We need the neighborhood. The March 15th HOA meeting loomed, our chance to strike. We met nightly in my garage, mapping the plan. Viper printed flyers, coded to avoid Carl's spies. Know your rights, March 15th, 9 a.m. Doc coached victims to speak, their voices shaky but growing bold. Bear, his old Colt holstered under his vest, trained neighbors to watch for goons. They'll try to intimidate, he warned. Don't flinch. I walked Cedar Ridge at dusk, passing Evelyn's barren garden, Lisa's dim porch, Rodriguez's empty driveway. My flag hung in my garage, clean but scarred. Carl thought he owned us, our homes, our memories. He didn't know the Lone Star Riders, 20 veterans who'd faced worse than his cheap tasers. I called Sarge, my voice calm. We're ready. Meetings in 6 days. Bring everyone. He chuckled. Full thunder, Razor. They won't know what hit him. March 15th, 2024, dawned with a Texas sunrise that painted Cedar Ridge gold, the kind of morning where hope feels possible, even when you're staring down a fight. I stood on my porch, coffee mug warm in my hands, the Marine Corps flag back on its pole after Carl's goons tried to bury it in mud. Its stars and bars caught the breeze, defiant, like a middle finger to every fine, every threat, every smirk from that con man in a cheap suit. My gate was still busted, chain links sagging where their SUV rammed it. But today wasn't about fences. It was about taking back our home. At 55, after 22 years as a Marine gunnery sergeant, I'd faced insurgents, sandstorms, and worse. Carl Novak, with his fake HOA cops, was just another enemy, slippery, not scary. But he'd hurt my neighbors, my people, and that's a line you don't cross. I sipped my coffee, the bitter tang grounding me, and checked my watch. 8:15 a.m. In 45 minutes, the Lone Star Riders, 20 veterans who'd become my family, would roll into the Cedar Ridge clubhouse lot, Harleys roaring, flags flying. We'd planned this for weeks, ever since Carl's goons broke my gate, trashed my flag, and thought they could bully me silent. They didn't know I'd been documenting cameras, fines, trackers, or that Evelyn Parker's tears over her ruined tulips lit a fire no HOA could douse. Lisa Torres's fear, Rodriguez's stolen Chevy, then Gwen's kid losing his ramp. Every story fueled us. Today wasn't just my fight. It was Cedar Ridge's. I walked inside, my boots loud on the hardwood, and grabbed my field jacket, the one I'd worn in Fallujah. My garage was a war room now, tools replaced by laptops, coffee pots, and Sarge's legal files. We dug deep, $112,000 in fines stolen, funneled to Carl's sister's shell companies, all to bankroll his city council run. 18 neighbors hit, 5 facing liens, widows and single moms targeted like prey. Sarge's police reports were filed, but Carl's cousin at City Hall could stall them. The HOA meeting was our shot, a public stage to bury Carl where his connections couldn't save him. At 8:30, the ground shook. 20 Harleys thundered down my street, chrome glinting, exhaust rattling windows like a storm rolling in. Sarge led, 60 and wiry, his Jag lawyer briefcase strapped to his bike. Viper followed, her braid tucked under a bandana, camera slung across her chest like a rifle. Doc's medic bag bounced, his eyes scanning for trouble. Bear, 74, his white beard flowing, rode with a Vietnam patch on his cut, an American flag snapping from his handlebars. Hank, Wrench, Diaz, Lena, Scout, Brooks, and 15 others, vets from Korea to Kandahar, filled the pack, their leather cuts patched with service ribbons, eyes hard but calm. They parked in my driveway, boots hitting gravel, and Sarge gripped my shoulder. Ready, Razor? I nodded, my flag catching my eye through the window. For Evelyn, Lisa, all of them. Viper grinned, adjusting her lens. Let's make Carl sweat. Bear spat into the dirt. He touched a Marine's flag. He's done. We loaded up, laptops, projectors, files, and rode to the clubhouse, a low brick building by the community pool. Neighbors peeked from porches, kids paused their bikes, sensing something big. My pulse was steady, like before a mission. Carl thought he owned Cedar Ridge. He was about to learn it belonged to us. The clubhouse lot was packed by 8:50, cars spilling onto grass, more neighbors than I'd ever seen. 50, maybe 60, drawn by our coded flyers. Know your rights, March 15th. Evelyn Parker waited by the door, 79 and frail, clutching a photo of her tulip garden, her husband's legacy. Lisa Torres stood beside her, still in ER scrubs, her 10-year-old son, Ethan, gripping her hand. Rodriguez leaned on his cane, his Vietnam cap tilted, eyes burning. The Nguyen's hovered near the back, their teenage son, Tim, staring at his shoes, his skateboard ramp a memory. Even Mrs. Carter, a quiet retiree who'd paid $1,900 to avoid Carl's wrath, showed up, her knitting bag a shield. Inside, the clubhouse smelled of stale coffee and bleach, folding chairs crammed in rows under fluorescent lights. A plywood podium stood at the front, a Cedar Ridge HOA banner sagging behind it. Carl was already there, his suit wrinkled, sweat beading on his forehead despite the AC. His goons, Tony, 40, with his illegal taser, Rick, wiry and twitchy, Gabe, a silent bruiser, and Mitch, a new guy with a buzz cut, huddled by the wall, their HOA security, vests looking cheaper up close. Tony's eyes darted to our bikes outside, his hand hovering near his belt. Carl's usual smirk was gone, replaced by a nervous tick, his fingers drumming the gavel. He knew something was coming, just not what. The room filled fast, chairs scraping, whispers buzzing like static. Evelyn sat front row, her photo trembling in her lap. Lisa settled Ethan beside her, his sneakers tapping nervously. Rodriguez took a seat near the aisle, cane tapping a slow rhythm. I stood with Sarge at the back, Viper and Doc setting up our projector, its hum cutting the tension. Bear and Hank flanked the doors, their presence heavy, not threatening but unmissable. Scout passed out bylaws. Real ones, not Carl's fakes. To neighbors, her nod telling me everyone was ready. At 9 o'clock sharp, Carl banged his gavel, voice cracking. Order. This is a homeowners meeting. Non-residents, out, now. Sarge stepped forward, boots echoing, briefcase open. Article 3, Section 2. Guests allowed with homeowner invites. He slid a stack of invites across the podium, signed by 20 neighbors. We're all invited, Novak. Carl's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to Tony, who shrugged. The goons shifted, Mitch cracking his knuckles, but they stayed put. Neighbors murmured, some leaning forward, others clutching purses like lifelines. Carl cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Fine, let's proceed. I took the mic, my voice filling the room, calm but edged like a blade. I'm Frank Malone, Marine Gunnery Sergeant, retired. For 3 months, Carl Novak's fake HOA cops have terrorized Cedar Ridge. I paused, letting that sink in, eyes locking with Carl's. His tic worsened, sweat staining his collar. They broke my gate, trashed my Marine flag, and tried to bury me in $4,200 of bogus fines. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. I nodded to Doc, who fired up the projector. The wall lit up with my gate-smashing video. February 22nd, 2024, 10:17 a.m. Carl's gray SUV, plowing through chain link. Tony ripping my flag. Rick snapping photos. Carl grinning like a shark. The room gasped, a collective inhale, hands covering mouths. Evelyn stood, her voice small but piercing, cutting through the murmurs. They killed my tulips. She held up her photo, dirt where Jim's garden once bloomed, her hands shaking but her eyes locked on Carl. I'm 79, Mr. Novak. My husband died in Korea, 53. Those tulips were his. You fined me $4,200, said you'd take my house if I didn't pay. I'm on Social Security. Where's your heart? Her voice broke, and Lisa reached for her hand, tears streaking her own face. Neighbors shifted, some nodding, others whispering. That's not right. Carl opened his mouth, but no words came, his gavel limp. Lisa stood next, scrubs wrinkled from a 14-hour shift, Ethan clinging to her side. I'm Lisa Torres, ER nurse. Your cops broke into my garage, scared my son half to death. She held up a $5,000 fine, paper creased from clutching it. My porch light, my trash cans, Ethan's bike, $5,000 for living my life. Tony banged on my door at midnight, said he'd escalate if I fought. Escalate what? I'm losing my home, Carl. Ethan looked up, eyes wide, and a woman in the back sobbed quietly. Rodriguez rose, slow, his cane tapping like a war drum. I'm Hector Rodriguez, Vietnam 69. You towed my 67 Chevy, my joy for 50 years. $6,800 to get her back, more than my pension. You entered my garage, no permission. Who gave you that right? The room was electric now, neighbors leaning forward, faces hardening. Carl's goons fidgeted, Tony's hand on his taser, Rick eyeing the exit. I nodded to Sarge, who took the stage, his voice like gravel. Carl's collected $112,000 in fines since December. He projected bank records, red circles around Blue Ridge Solutions, Cedar Security, Novak Enterprises, all die in Novak shells. Only $9,000 fixed our streets. The rest? Wired to Carl's sister, funding his city council campaign. A neighbor shouted, thief. Others joined, liar. Crook. Carl slammed his gavel, yelling, order, but it was drowned by boos. Viper stepped up, her camera flashing as she played more footage. Tony planting a tracker on Lisa's car, 1:03 a.m., his face clear. Rick snapping Evelyn's windows at dawn, Gabe tailing Rodriguez to the VA, their SUV's plate glowing. This isn't security, Viper said, her voice sharp. It's stalking, harassment, fraud. Doc held up a binder, 18 victim statements, $42,000 in fines, 5 liens. 18 families, he said, widows, veterans, single moms, fined for living. 5 homes nearly lost. This is racketeering. Sarge dropped police reports on the podium, trespassing, vandalism, fraud, filed yesterday. You're done, Novak. The crowd erupted, chairs scraping as neighbors stood, clapping, shouting. A gray-haired man in row 3, silent till now, yelled, "You stole from us." Mrs. Carter, her knitting forgotten, shook her fist. "Shame on you." Evelyn hugged Lisa, tears mixing with smiles, Rodriguez raising his cane like a sword. I faced Carl, his face ashen, eyes darting like a trapped rat. "You thought you could break us," I said, voice low, carrying over the chaos. Evelyn, Lisa, Hector, me, thought we'd fold. You didn't count on Cedar Ridge, on my brothers. I pointed to the riders, their arms crossed, flags framing them like sentinels. This is our home, not your bank. Carl tried to speak, his voice a rasp. Misunderstandings, clerical errors, I swear, but the crowd roared. Out. Out. A woman threw a crumpled fine at the podium, others following, paper raining like ash. Tony bolted for the side door, but Viper cut him off, camera in his face. Going somewhere, felon? She said, her grin cold. Rick and Gabe froze, Mitch backing into a corner, their tasers useless now. Sirens wailed outside, Sarge's reports had hit, cops rolling in faster than Carl's cousin could block. Carl lunged for his briefcase, paper spilling, and sprinted for the back exit, his goons scattering. Neighbors cheered, some laughing, others crying, the room alive with something new, power. Sarge raised a hand, voice cutting through. Motions, suspend Carl Novak, effective now. Disband his security team. Elect a homeowner board today. Hands shot up, 48-3, Carl's 2 allies, a greasy accountant and a silent realtor, slumping in defeat. Evelyn stood again, her photo steady now. I nominate myself for president, she said, voice clear. Lisa seconded, Rodriguez thirded, and the room clapped, a wave of yes. I looked at Sarge, his nod saying it all. We'd won. The meeting broke into chaos, but the good kind, neighbors hugging, swapping stories, their fear gone. Evelyn gripped my arm, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen. Jim would have loved this, she said, eyes wet. Lisa lifted Ethan onto her shoulders, his grin wide. No more hiding, she whispered. Rodriguez shook Bear's hand, 2 Vietnam vets trading nods, no words needed. Outside, cops cuffed Tony, his taser confiscated, his rap sheet catching up. Carl's SUV was gone, but it didn't matter. By March 20th, he'd fled Austin, fraud and vandalism charges piling up, his campaign signs torn down citywide. Rick and Gabe vanished, Mitch turned informant, Diane Shell's under state audit. We didn't stop at motions. The riders led a community workday, March 22nd, tearing out Carl's approved shrubs to plant a veterans memorial garden. Tulips for Evelyn's gym, roses for Rodriguez's Chevy, a flagpole for my Marine emblem, its stars gleaming under Texas sun. Volunteers poured in, and Gwynn's, Torres's, even Mrs. Carter, her knitting swapped for a trowel. Lisa's porch light burned bright, no fines, no fear. Rodriguez drove his Chevy home, the impound waved after Sarge's legal blitz, neighbors cheering as he revved it. Evelyn took the HOA helm, her first act banning emergency inspections forever. I walked the garden that night, alone, my flag catching moonlight. Cedar Ridge wasn't just streets, houses, rules, it was us, scarred but standing. Carl thought he could break our spirit, steal our homes, erase our memories. He didn't know Lone Star riders, didn't know Evelyn's grit, Lisa's courage, Rodriguez's pride. He didn't know me. My gate's still bent, but it's mine, and so's this fight. We didn't just win. We rebuilt, stronger, together. That's the story of how Cedar Ridge took back our home from fake HOA cops who thought they could break us. I'm Frank Razor Malone, and I learned something in those weeks of fight. A community's only as strong as the people who stand up. Carl Novak's gone, his scam buried, but the scars, Evelyn's garden, Lisa's fear, my gate, remind us to stay sharp. We built a memorial, not just for veterans, but for every neighbor who said, enough. My Marine flag flies proud, and Cedar Ridge feels alive again. Kids biking, porches lit, laughter spilling over fences. If you've ever faced an HOA bully, you know this fight's universal. I hope our story lights a fire in you to push back, stand tall, and protect what's yours. Thanks for listening, folks. This one's for you, for us, for Cedar Ridge. Keep fighting the good fight, and I'll see you in the next one.